if you're a mentor, you realize that a mentoring relationship isn't going to last forever. So in this video, we want to talk about how do you conclude a mentoring relationship. And so realistically, there's a lot of different ways that one will end, right? It doesn't always end the way that we hope it will, but we need to be realistic about what the challenges and what the issues are. So realistically then, that's really part of it, is to recognize that a relationship won't last forever, right? So how have you grappled with that reality with people that you've invested so much in?
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple main things to be aware of. Just going in as a mentor, have realistic expectations. And part of it is I don't have the capacity for all of them to last forever, but I want them to, the 4 goals we talk about, I want to see people through that process. I want to see people almost graduate, I guess, with being stable and have a solid understanding of who Jesus is and be able to pour into others. That would be the dream if they all ended after full maturity and release. But I think also just going into it, don't take it personally if they dip out at a certain time or if they don't show up or something like that.
Yeah. So that's great thought. Really what we want to do in this video is help people have a strategy for what to do when that happens in a relationship, and how to handle that, how to make the most of it, and just so you're not lost. You're not just trying to figure it out on your own. And so really we've identified basically 3 sorts of ways that mentoring relationships end. One of them is when there's a life situation change. So what are we talking about there?
Yeah, that can be just a myriad of things where my life changes or their life changes, and then things have to shift. They have to switch around. Specifically, someone you're mentoring might have a baby, or they might move, or something happens in your life as a mentor, like your kid needs more attention if they're in a transition, or as they are going off to college, or whatever the transition may be. Maybe you get married, maybe you get a new job, maybe you move, or even a physical injury or something like that. So there's a lot of life change that can impact a mentoring relationship. And I would actually encourage all the mentors in that, if you're going and your relationship's going well with your mentee and something happens on your side, maybe try to set them up with someone else, pass them off, instead of just, we don't want to be the ones ghosting them.
Right.
And we don't want to be the ones that just drop off and say, hey, I'm sorry, I can't meet anymore, we're done.
Right.
Give them a resource, give them another person to try to ease, cushion the blow if it's coming from you.
Right, because that is going to happen in life. Life situations will change. Now, a second thing that happens is that the relationship just might not take off. We make mentoring connections. A lot of times the mentor doesn't really know the person. It's kind of coming through the online or something like that. And so maybe there's never a chance to meet in the first place. It doesn't connect. Or maybe they start to meet and it just doesn't really get momentum, or it fizzles out. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've had it happen a couple times where a request will come in and you send the initial email and then nothing. And that just nothing happened, and that's fine. Other times you'll start meeting with a person and then they just disappear.
Yeah.
And again, just don't take it personally, because it happens to all of us.
Right. And then a third thing that happens in mentoring relationships is sometimes the person who requests mentoring has a very specific need or a specific question. And so that's going to be answered or dealt with, before too long, right? And so the relationship will not be what it was, or maybe it'll end, maybe it'll transition. We'll talk about transitions later on in this video. And so I thought, in your experience as a mentor, what do you think about the idea of putting the finish line conversation on the table early on in a mentoring relationship. Is that a good idea or not?
I think it happens naturally with the third. If the person has a specific question or specific need, then that just happened. Like when you initially meet them, it's usually they're like, hey, can we meet for a month? Or hey, can you answer these questions? Right. And then there's kind of a finish line already addressed. If not, it's probably something you want to word carefully. You don't want to just be like, hey, this isn't a relationship forever, sorry.
Or you don't matter to me that much or whatever, you know. Yeah.
But it's probably appropriate to indicate like, hey, do you want to, like, what do you need from me? What are you hoping to get out of this? Do you want to meet for X number of times and then reassess and see where we're at? Something like that can be an appropriate question for the first meeting. Yeah,
that does help. And you can set it up. So, I mean, they don't know what to expect. They don't know if they're making a lifetime commitment to something, maybe. Right. Or maybe they want to make a lifetime commitment and I'm not ready for that or whatever. So I think that idea of setting an initial trial period in a sense, and let's see how it goes, that's probably a good idea. Mm-hmm. So now there's 3 kind of finish lines that we've identified to say, you know, here's when a relationship is going to conclude in some way or another. And there's 3 ways that happens. The first one is when that person is just following Jesus and they're on their feet and they make progress to an independent relationship with God. What might that look like? And how would that feel like a finish line then?
Yeah, I think that kind of is where you launch them and hopefully they go and mentor someone else. If you can see that they are consistently following Jesus, then a lot of times those may end in like a friendship or just a different type of relationship where they don't need mentoring from you. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because they're self-sufficient with the word.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. And we'll talk about where that relationship might go in a minute, but because they're tracking with where you're tracking, then there's more likelihood that that's going to continue in some way or another. Mm-hmm. But the opposite kind of finish line is when the person you're mentoring just is not moving forward at all. And maybe they're not showing up, or maybe they're not doing what they said they would do, or whatever. What does that kind of a finish line feel like?
Yeah, I think you have to assess just the situation when it comes to inconsistency. Maybe they're inconsistent, like meeting. They're flaky in meeting with you, or maybe they're inconsistent with their walk with the Lord. I've seen a lot of times they'll threaten to go back to the LDS church, even though every conversation you have they don't want to, but then they do because it's comfortable and familiar. And so inconsistency, or they put meetings on the calendar all the time and they just don't show up. I think that's tricky because you want to still be there for them, and they're still, usually those people are still showing interest. Yeah. But then like other things, I don't know, I think about the parable of the sower, the different seeds and where they land. And that feels like a really I personally want to be there to help facilitate growth if it's going to actually take root. But some of those people are like seeds scattered on like rocky path or thorns or like choked out, and that's hard to watch. Honestly, it's really painful. So what would you do, Ross, with inconsistency?
Well, I know my wife has had this a bunch. She's had a bunch of people that signed it, kind of connected through our church and so forth. People said they want a mentor, and she's been willing and available. But for her, it's been frustrating. And because she has a lot of commitments in her life, she's had to say, look, I just can't invite you to continue to do this kind of non-committed relationship with me, because I need to make other commitments. There's other people who want my attention, who are ready to do something with it, or whose life is, available. And it's hard for her because she understands that that person's going through some real need and going through a tough time, and it's partly why they are flaky and so forth. But because for her it becomes a matter of a stewardship, and say I only have so many hours in my day. I need to pour myself into those people who are going to receive it and who value it as much as I do.
Certainly.
Yeah. So that's a tough one, though, when we have to think about cutting off a relationship when it's our initiative. And then the third finish line, again, we talked about it a minute ago. That's when life circumstances change, and so that's when some of those events happen, and we have to say, okay, this is the nature of things. We can't continue to meet the way we were meeting before or do what we're doing. But that leads us to this question of, when is it going to be a conclusion, or when is it going to be a transition? Like the whole idea of transitions versus conclusions is probably a helpful tool for mentors to think about when they see a relationship kind of coming toward a conclusion. Maybe it's not a conclusion. Maybe it's a transition. So reflect on that with us. Help us understand that a little bit.
Yeah, I feel like that comes kind of organically.
Yeah,
and a little bit differently with each person. But transition, I think, I don't know, I've been mentoring for maybe 4 years now, 3 or 4 years, and I don't think any of them have concluded. They've all transitioned.
Okay. But
And
in
some
different
of it
ways, I
looks
assume?
like, some of it looks like a conclusion to a formal mentoring process.
Which is fair, right?
But not a conclusion to the relationship.
Okay.
So some of them have taken the form of, we used to meet weekly, and now it's like we talk once a month. Or we used to meet in person, and now it's just a phone call. I have one girl who is overseas, and so we used to do Zoom meetings, and we don't do that anymore. She just emails me on occasion. That's like once a month email back and forth. So it does shift around. I have a couple of them that have just like legitimately become friends, who are like fellow believers committed to following Jesus and seeking to like mentor and walk with other people. And so it's almost become a mutual friendship.
Okay. Yeah. And like you said, that's probably going to be really different for every relationship. And so there's not necessarily a template or a protocol that we can tell our mentors that this is going to happen, and they have to just figure that out, right? Prayerfully and based on what's going on in their own life.
Yeah.
So let's conclude with a couple things. I want our mentors to think about how they're going to respond to the finish line when a relationship transitions or concludes. What do you think is like the key question that a mentor should be asking about how they did, and so what do you think is maybe the most important factor to think about?
Yeah, I think just, are you finishing well?
Okay.
And what does finishing well look like? Part of it that I think through is like this, I've been given this person to steward by God, and they have value. And so in front of God, can I say like, I did my best, and here they are, like keep working on their heart. But some things are like, is there anything left undone or unsaid that's important? Like the gospel, has it been clear? Do they know how to study the Bible? Do they know how to find resources if they need them? Also, just with certain issues that people may be facing, I think we actually see an example from Jesus of maybe you have to say something that's hard to hear. Maybe you have to point out like, hey, I see this pattern in your life. Here's what God's word says about it. Like, I want to see you grow in that. I want to see you surrender to him in that. And sometimes those hard things will push someone away. Right. And it may feel like a transition period, but once you say that, they may actually trust you more. Right. So it may be they pull away or they pull closer.
Right. That's a good point.
Some of those hard sayings, I think Jesus actually uses to filter who he spends his time with. And so
Right.
with our mentees, maybe there's a little bit of inconsistency. Maybe there's a little flakiness in like, I don't know about Jesus, or I'm following him and then I'm not, I'm following him and then I'm not. And you have to point it out directly
Right.
at some point maybe.
Right.
And that can actually either conclude a relationship
Yeah, it
or
could.
draw it closer, and they're super grateful you did it. So
Right. So that's a good point. So if I'm thinking about, that's a good point for me, because I have a mentoring relationship that's concluding, and it probably has concluded. I don't know, because I was in an accident and we didn't meet while I was in the hospital and stuff like that, and we haven't communicated about it. So my bad. So this is a good question for me to think about. What's next? What do I owe him in that relationship? What's my stewardship from God to that person at this point in my life? And so that's a great question to think about. Is there any unfinished business? What do I need to say or do, to wrap it up? So hopefully that's really helpful for you today. Now, I just want to say as we close that if you're working with a team, or if you're on a church, you have a supervisor or a coach in your mentoring ministry, please let that person know. When the relationship is done, or when it changes, transition to something else, then your supervisor or your team should know about that, because there might be somebody else that's waiting in line that they know about, or there might be a handoff that they could make. And so however the structure that you use works, that would be something that we'd really encourage you to keep in communication with your team about what's going on in your mentoring relationships and how they might end. And so that's how to conclude, how conclusion happens in a mentoring relationship. Hopefully that's helpful to you and gives you some things that you can think about in your mentoring ministry going forward from here.